Hey, what's up, guys? I had meant to finish the Confederate Osprey series on the Confederate Navy. Right? I had gone over the other ones, of course, the ironclads for a fledgling country. Yeah, that's right, I said it. That didn't have anywhere near the production capacity of their enemies. They made some interesting ironclads with some mixed results. Of course, I went over the blockade runners, a whole thing I didn't know anything about. And of course, I went over the commerce raiders, which was one of the most fascinating things about the war. But one thing I had known about, of course, was the first submarine in history to successfully attack its target was the Confederate submarine, the Hunley. Right? I had gone over a video of historical movies I thought were interesting, and one of them was I believe it was TNT. Ted Turner produced a film about the Hunley with Armand Desante, who actually does actually a good job in the film as command, as the Captain Dixon. Um, I really want to take my time with this, going over this. It's fascinating. The thing with me is, of course, I've been to Charleston, where the successful attack by the Hunley happened. I did video on the memorial. It always is haunting to me, and maybe that's just I'm a very sentimental person. I'm also a man who appreciates courage in some of the worst circumstances. I mean, the U-boats in World War One, the airships in World War One. Did you want to drown in a steel can in the water, or did you want to burn to death? Thousands of feet in the air, and there was still no shortage of men ready to take that position, knowing what had happened to the men before them, for causes that were lost, and that are considered evil. But then again, considered evil by who? By people who are so pathetic. It's almost an honor that they think you're the bad guy. Right? Anyway, get a little thing here. We go over the same idea, of course, from this famous painting of the Hunley. Right? Done, of course, by these two Scottish gentlemen. Right? Of course, once again, Mr. Mallory, I had gone over him in the other thing. Of course, the whole idea of, okay, he's the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, faced with a daunting task, an extensive coastline, only a fraction of the resources available to the Union, okay, and the Union Navy, they take all the ships pretty much. So what you had essentially was the idea of coming up with special weapons, okay, ironclads built essentially by scratch, by private means, making extensive use of, however, probably one of the most underrated things, the expensive use of torpedoes, okay, what we would now call mines, were just being developed. And they had actually, the Confederacy employed a lot of these torpedoes, these mines. And they used them on the ground at some point. They actually made landmines to use on the ground. Of course, the Union thought that was unfair. And it's like, hey, you outnumber us to have more weapons, so whatever's fair. But isn't that always the case, right? Of course, you go over the history of submarine warfare. Remember, there was one in the Revolutionary War, the Turtle, but it didn't succeed. So the idea of a submersible vehicle was thought of even before, but had really only been done in the 18th century here. Of course, it wasn't successful, but I guess the guy survived. I mean, a lot of the book it's not just the Hunley, it's not just the submarine, it's the torpedo boats. And the idea of these torpedo heads, okay, the idea that you're not shooting a torpedo yet. You have floating torpedoes in the water that hit the boat when they hit it, right? But then you have the idea of basically the spar torpedo, which is basically you're like with a whale, you're spearing, the target, so this thing will blow up. And this is probably, from everything now they're saying about the Hunley, what they surmise, is probably what caused its demise. But anyway, going over here, of course, the torpedo boats. Now, it's interesting when you have those drug-running submarines, right? They always talk about the drug-running submarines in the Caribbean, right? They're not really submarines. They're more like these torpedo boats, right? Right, when viewed, when immersed, literally a little bit is still on the surface. Now, obviously, I'd rather be in this thing than in the submarine. So obviously they made more of these, but none of these were really successful. Look at this, the mid. Oh, I hate those things. The Noceums. Brooklyn Navy Yard. Right? I wonder, do they still have that there? Probably not. Of course, the original Hunley, the Pioneer one, right? The original, these guys here, right? Hunley, they decided to make a submarine originally. I like how the idea was to make a submarine for privateering, right? But it was interesting how privateering, essentially, they were even given a writ for that, but no one really ended up doing that. The commerce raiders, remember, they didn't take what was on the ships. They sunk into ships and destroyed and wasted all the stuff, right, to hurt the Union. Eventually, the privateering didn't really work out too well, and the Confederate government just took control of these private things, okay, because they were like socialists. And they worked this time. Everyone ended up working for the Confederate government. So interesting. This is where they made the Hunley. And originally they wanted to use different engines. They wanted to use steam. They wanted to use an electromagnetic engine. But when push came to shove, the only thing that was reliable was a hand-cranked piston. Right? They were deemed failure. So you're gonna have a bunch of dudes in there having to move this thing by hand. I guess you would call that analog. You see the schematics. So the Pioneer 1 and 2 were the precursors to it, but even the Hunley, it was less advanced than those two designs. Eventually they had to. They made it out of boilers. So there wasn't even like these that were made from scratch. So it's interesting the lack of resources playing into this. And there's George Dixon, Lieutenant Dixon, an engineer from Kentucky, fought at Shiloh. Oof. And it's interesting too that when they were training the crews, man, a lot of the crews died before that. General Beauregard in Charleston, he thought that maybe this was a bad idea, but there was, even when the guys would drown testing this thing out, there was no shortage of men that wanted to volunteer. Okay? Now, in the movie, you see why. Okay? In Charleston, the city was under siege from the Union, who periodically would attack and shell and bombard the city, killing civilians. Okay? Of course, in the end, what do they think happened? No one really knows what happened. They blew up the Houstonic, but then they were missing, and they only were found right in '95. Interesting, the novelist Clive Cussler, right? He funded that. They found it. They brought it up, and they buried the crew. They found the remains, obviously after 100-something years, lost forever. It seemed like, but they weren't. And of course, I want to get to that Hunley Museum, but it's only open on the weekend, so I have to travel and somehow get there. I have to plan it out. I have to tire it out. Yeah, it's always poignant to me to just be gone forever. They're surmising that, like, unlike the film where the guys basically drown themselves so they don't suffocate because they're stuck at the bottom, they were a little closer to the ship than they thought with these things. The shockwave most likely killed the guys. I hope that's how they died. I don't know. There's something about the Hunley. There's something in me that, the sacrifice. It's hard to explain it. It seems like all the good guys. It seems like the side that represents things. that are more human, that are more, despite what the other side says, all it is them losing, right? It seems like the bad guys always fucking win. Yeah, maybe I had a couple of drinks tonight. We get to another torpedo boat like this thing. Now, I'd rather be in this. Something goes wrong, I'll just jump out, right? But these things were not too successful. It is, wow, look at the Hunley. Man, no thanks. Oh my god. It was the other submarines. It was the Pioneers or the other ones. But remember, the America made one, the Alligator. And what I thought was fascinating about this was they mentioned these other submarines. I wasn't even aware of these other submarines. So now obviously this picture of the Hunley, you see it, right? You see them there. It's like they were this fucking close, man. You know, shockwaves travel worse on the water. When you're hiding in the naval battles, there's the ordnance blowing up. A lot of dudes in the water would just get killed. Their organs would burst. Anyway, the forgotten submarines. So now we have, mysterious submarine, the New Orleans submarines. Of course, we never know. We know about this Frenchman had one in Philly. He did it as like a stunt. What a cool name, Brutus de Villeray. There was this other submarine that they mentioned, but I don't know if this really happened. The Alligator, now this was interesting. This was the one that the Union made, sort of based on that, by that French guy, right, who pulled that stunt. They had him design the Alligator, but once again, it was lost in a storm. Okay, it was cut loose. It was being towed. There was no one in it. This one I never heard. The USS Intelligent Whale. What a weird name. Okay? A crew of 13 months. She was nicknamed Disastrous Jonah after sinking 3 times during her trials, drowning her crew. So they were going through the same thing that the Hunley was going through. And this was, of course, after the war. She was decommissioned but survives a relic in Washington Navy Yard where she can be seen today. That would be interesting. Now, this is what I wanted to mention. Okay, there was a Confederate submarine, the St. Patrick, right? Like that, also hand cranked. She was launched in the summer of 1864. So this is like right after the war is like almost over. Torpedo malfunction, the attack was called off. But this is cool because this was an underrated thing, okay? And this was something you saw later in other wars. Submarine, not as an attacking thing, but a submarine as a transport. So it may not have been a successful attack vehicle, but she spent the last months of the war running supplies across the Alabama River from Mobile to Spanish Point. Interesting. So this one was a success in smuggling stuff onto the water from those damn Yankees. And of course, she was scuttled, so you'll never know what it looked like. But yeah, and then they go over the specs. I mean, Osprey. I mean, this whole series of Confederate stuff, and some of the Union stuff was done by these two, man. Great job, dudes. Excellent job. And and whatever photos they had of it, of the USS Spuyten-Duyvil. Everyone know New York was, that, right? Devil's Spout, right? It's in that weird part of the Bronx where you don't know if it's the Bronx or Manhattan. Of course, that's Dutch. Right? Ironic that, this torpedo boat was successful. It actually sunk the Confederate ironclad, the Albemarle. Oh, what did I say about the bad guys winning all the time? It's fucking pissing me off. Wouldn't it be nice if the good guys win for a change? Well, there's always tomorrow.